she didn't scream it. She didn't whisper it either. She said it the way a child says something they already decided was wrong before the sound even finished leaving the room, calm, certain, and completely ready for whatever came next. 6 years old. And in her entire short life, she had never once looked at a situation and thought, this one is too big for me. The man she was talking to raised his eyes slowly. He was the most feared man in the city. The kind of man whose name people said differently from other names, quieter, carefully, like they were afraid the syllables themselves might somehow reach him. 3 men in black suits stood behind him. And the restaurant, this warm, busy, noisy lunch crowd restaurant, had gone so still you could hear the kitchen breathing. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Go back to your seat, little girl. I will. She tilted her head, just slightly. Right after you tell my mummy you're sorry. Behind him, one of his men shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Another one became suddenly, deeply interested in the pattern of the floor tiles. The man studied her. Do you know who I am? She looked him up and down, slow, patient, the way you look at a math problem your teacher said was hard but you already think you've solved. No, she said. A pause. But I know what you just did. And I know it wasn't right. So who you are doesn't really change that. Okay, I need you to pause with me for just 1 second. Because a 6-year-old girl just walked across a restaurant, past 3 armed men in suits, past every frozen adult who was too scared to even breathe, and planted herself directly in front of the most dangerous person in this city. And she is not scared. Not even a little bit. Like she looked at this man, the man grown men cross entire streets to avoid, and thought, yes. This is exactly the kind of problem I handle. Before we go any further, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a heart in the comments. And if you're watching this from your couch at midnight wondering why you can't stop, tell me what city you're in, because I want to see how far this story travels. It truly means everything to me watching this community grow all the way across the world. Every single view helps us keep building stories like this one, together. Now. Back to the restaurant. Because he hasn't moved. His men haven't moved. The entire lunch crowd, plates still warm, food going untouched, is watching a child in a blue floral dress and lensless glasses stand her ground like she owns every inch of the floor she's standing on. Her mother, still holding 3 plates, still wearing her apron, hands trembling slightly in a way she's desperately trying to hide, is staring at her daughter with an expression caught exactly halfway between terror and something she hasn't felt in a very long time. Pride. He looked at this child. 6 years old. Colorful beads in her braids. Glasses with no lenses. A homework book tucked under one arm. Standing directly in front of him like she had not only every right to be there, but like she had been specifically placed in this restaurant, on this exact afternoon, for exactly this purpose. He had not felt surprised in years. He felt something now. He just wasn't sure yet what to call it. You're very bold, he said slowly. For someone your size. She considered this seriously, the way she considered most things. My mummy says boldness doesn't have a size requirement. A beat. She sounds wise, he said. And there was something in his voice when he said it. Not mockery. Something quieter than that. Something he hadn't used in a very long time. She is, the little girl said simply. She's the hardest working person I know. She wakes up before it's even light outside every single day so I can eat and go to school and have everything I need. She paused. Let that sit there. So when you raise your voice at her over a mistake that wasn't even her fault, her voice didn't rise, didn't waver, it just stayed level and clear, like river water. That's not okay. That's really not okay at all. From behind the counter, her mother had stopped pretending to work. She was watching her daughter, this small, impossible, enormous person, standing in the blast radius of the most dangerous man in the city. And not flinching. And something cracked open, quietly, in the back of her throat that she had to swallow fast to keep down. He said nothing for a long moment. He was thinking something. He didn't share what it was. The restaurant waited. Nobody breathed. And this little girl, 6 years old, lensless glasses, homework book, stood perfectly still. Waiting for an answer. Like she had all the time in the world. Like she already knew how this ended. What happens next, nobody in that restaurant was ready for it. But to understand it fully, we need to go back. Just a little. The lunch rush at that restaurant didn't build gradually. It arrived all at once, like someone had thrown a switch, and suddenly every table was full, every order was urgent, and this woman was moving at the speed that only single mothers who cannot afford to make mistakes ever truly learn to move. She had 3 plates balanced on her left arm, an apology ready on her lips for table 7, and a mental countdown running in the back of her head for a school pickup she absolutely could not be late for again. Her uniform, navy and white, she had ironed at 5:30 that morning. Her feet had been hurting since 11. She hadn't eaten since a small bowl of rice she'd finished standing over the kitchen sink before her shift even started. She didn't complain about any of it. Complaining took time she didn't have. Near the window, the spot she had quietly claimed as her daughter's corner because it got the best light and sat farthest from the kitchen noise, her little girl was perched on a wooden stool, homework book open across her knees, pencil tucked behind one ear, lensless glasses sitting slightly crooked on her nose the way they always did by midday. She was working through her sums with the focused silence of someone who took mathematics personally. Occasionally she looked up to watch her mother move between the tables. Tracked her with those sharp, patient eyes. Then returned to her page without a word. She never asked if her mother was tired. She already knew. She just watched. Her mother swung back past the counter, picked up 2 more plates, smiled at a customer who hadn't smiled back, and kept moving. This was the rhythm of her life. Not glamorous. Not easy. But hers. Built carefully, protected fiercely, held together by sheer will and the knowledge that a little girl in lensless glasses was counting on her to keep it standing. She had been at this restaurant for almost 2 years. Before that, a hospital cleaning job that paid less and asked more. Before that, a city she had left without looking back, carrying her daughter in one arm and everything she owned in one bag, choosing a fresh start over a familiar wound. She didn't talk about the before. She just kept moving forward. Before we go any further, go ahead and share this story with someone who needs to read it tonight. And tell me in the comments what country you're watching from, because I want to see this reach every single corner of the world. It truly means everything to me seeing this community grow from every time zone on the map. Every share helps us keep telling stories about women like her, women who carry everything quietly and ask for nothing, together. The door opened at 12:47. She didn't notice immediately. She was mid-apology to table 4 about a delayed order, nodding with the practiced sincerity of someone who had apologized for things that weren't her fault so many times it had become a second language. But the restaurant noticed. The noise dropped first, not all at once, but in a wave, the way sound dies when something moves through a room that doesn't belong to ordinary afternoons. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Chopsticks stopped moving. A child at the back table tugged her mother's sleeve and received no response, because her mother was already staring at the door. 3 men entered first. Black suits. Polished shoes. The particular stillness of men trained to stand slightly in front of someone important and make that importance felt before he even appeared. They didn't look around the room the way regular people do when they enter a new space, curious, adjusting. They assessed it. Catalogued exits. Dismissed threats. All in under 4 seconds. Then he walked in. He was tall in the way that had nothing to do with height, the kind of tall that came from the complete and total absence of apology in how he occupied space. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. A tattoo curved up the left side of his neck, disappearing into his collar. His face was unreadable in the specific way that faces become unreadable when they have spent years practicing it. The most feared man in the city. He didn't announce it. He didn't need to. The restaurant announced it for him, in its silence. She looked up from table 4. She saw him. She looked back down at her notepad, wrote nothing, and made a decision in the space of one single breath: keep moving, keep working, do not make eye contact, do not exist more than necessary. She was good at that. She had practice. He chose the table near the center, not the corner, not the window, the center, where everything could be seen and nothing could approach unnoticed, and sat with the ease of a man who had never once in his adult life wondered whether a seat was available. His men arranged themselves nearby. One by the door. One standing. One seated but not relaxed. She approached with a menu. She kept her eyes professionally neutral. Took his order without looking at his face directly. Moved back toward the kitchen quickly, but not quickly enough to look afraid, because looking afraid was its own kind of invitation. She was doing fine. Everything was fine. Then the order came out wrong. Not her fault, the kitchen had misread the ticket, swapped one dish for another, a mistake that happened twice a week and was corrected within minutes on ordinary afternoons. She was already moving to fix it, already halfway through her apology, already managing it the way she managed everything, quietly, efficiently, without drama. But one of his men leaned back in his chair and said something about the wait. His voice was flat and unimpressed and just loud enough to be heard by the surrounding tables. And he looked up. He said 3 words. Not loudly. He never needed to be loud. He said it the way people say things when they have spent years never needing to raise their voice because the room always adjusted itself around them first. 3 words. Directed at her. About the delay. About the mistake. The temperature in the room dropped 4 degrees. She went very still, just for one single moment, and in that moment, her professional smile held perfectly. Her notepad didn't shake. Her voice, when she opened her mouth to respond, was steady and appropriate and apologetic in exactly the right measure. She was composed. She was fine. She was absolutely not fine. Near the window, a pencil stopped moving. The little girl looked up from her homework. She looked at her mother's face, not the face her mother was showing the room, but the face underneath it. The one that only appeared in the set of her jaw and the particular stillness behind her eyes when something had landed somewhere she wasn't going to let anyone see. She saw it. She always saw it. She closed her homework book. Set it on the stool beside her, very carefully. And climbed down. Nobody notices a 6-year-old cross a restaurant. People rarely do. Children move through adult spaces like weather, present, unremarkable, easy to look past. The suited men didn't track her. The watching customers didn't register her. Even him, whose instincts noticed everything, hadn't yet recalibrated his attention to floor level. She stopped directly in front of him. She was small enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to see his face properly. She did this without self-consciousness, the way she did most things, completely, without apology, taking her time. He looked down. He found a child in a blue floral dress and colorful beaded braids looking back up at him through glasses that, if you looked closely, had absolutely nothing in the frames where the lenses were supposed to be. She studied him for 1 full second. Then she said, clearly, and without any particular heat. Did you just shout at my mummy? The restaurant didn't go silent. It had already been silent. It went something past silence. The specific quality of a room full of people holding their breath in unison, every single person suddenly very aware of where their hands were, and very carefully not moving them. One of his men made a sound. It might have been the beginning of a laugh. He converted it to a cough with professional speed. He looked at this child. Go back to your seat, he said. His voice was even. Almost kind, the way a very certain person can afford to be almost kind. I will, she said. Right after you apologize to her. The man by the door found something fascinating to look at on the ceiling. He tilted his head slightly. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger exactly. Something more like the expression of a man who has encountered an unexpected variable and is deciding how to classify it. Do you know who I am? She looked him up and down once. Slowly. The way you look at a difficult problem you've already decided you're not afraid of. No, she said. But I know what you just did. And I know it wasn't kind. So who you are doesn't really change that part. Behind her, her mother had stopped moving entirely. Standing 3 feet away, every maternal instinct she owned firing at once, torn perfectly in half between stepping forward and pulling her daughter back, and the terrifying, complicated realization that her 6-year-old was handling this with more composure than most adults she knew. He said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the child. She looked back at him. Unblinking. Unhurried. Completely, utterly unafraid, not in the reckless way of someone who hadn't understood the danger, but in the quieter, stranger way of someone who had looked at the danger directly, considered it carefully, and simply decided it wasn't bigger than what she needed to do. He had walked into rooms that made armed men step backward. He had sat across tables from people who had spent weeks preparing to face him and still forgot how to breathe correctly when he arrived. He had never in his adult life looked into a pair of eyes, lensless glasses, beaded braids, homework book under one arm, and felt something he could only describe, privately, reluctantly, as being studied. Like she was cataloging him. Like she was filing something away. Like she had looked at the most feared man in the city and thought, interesting. Let me see what you're actually made of. He couldn't explain why that felt significant. He just knew that it did. And that he was, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely curious about what she was going to say next. He left the restaurant without apologizing. That part mattered. He walked out the way he walked into everything. Unhurried, composed, his men falling into formation around him without being told, the black cars pulling away from the curb before the restaurant door had even finished closing behind them. But inside the last car, he didn't reach for his phone. He didn't open the folder on the seat beside him. He just sat. Watched the city move past the window. And thought about a 6-year-old in lensless glasses who had looked at him the way no one had looked at him in years. Not with fear. Not with calculation. Not with the particular performance of respect that people constructed around him like armor they were hoping he wouldn't test. Just, directly. Like he was a problem she was genuinely interested in solving. His second-in-command sat across from him in the careful silence of a man who had learned over many years exactly when to speak and exactly when to say nothing. He was currently saying nothing with great discipline. After a long moment, he spoke. The woman, he said. The one who works there. His man looked up. Find out everything. It took 48 hours. The file placed on his desk 2 days later was thin, not because there was little to find, but because her life, examined from the outside, looked exactly like what it was. A woman who worked hard, asked for nothing, and had built something small and sturdy and entirely her own from very little raw material. It was read aloud the way it always was, standing, economical with words. 32. Single mother. 1 child, age 6. Currently employed at the restaurant, 14 months. Previous employment, 2 years as a cleaner at a private hospital. Before that, another city. Before that, the file went quiet in the way files go quiet when someone has worked very hard not to leave traces. He listened without expression. Then came a pause. The particular kind of pause that meant what came next required a different kind of attention. She worked the night rotation, his man said carefully. Ward C. The private ward. His eyes moved from the window. Ward C was not on any official hospital registry. It didn't appear in any public record. It existed in the specific way that certain rooms in certain buildings exist for certain people, quietly, expensively, and only when necessary. It was where men from his world went when they were injured in ways that couldn't be explained to ordinary hospitals without generating questions nobody wanted answered. How long was she there? 8 months. She left abruptly. No formal resignation on record. He looked at the file. Something was pressing at the edge of his memory, not a clear image. More like the feeling of a shape he recognized but couldn't yet name. The way you sometimes hear a piece of music and know you've heard it before, but cannot place where or when or what it meant to you at the time. Pull the Ward C records, he said. From her employment period. His man nodded once and left. He sat alone with the thin file and depressing feeling, and the city outside his window going about its ordinary evening. And he thought about a woman who had stood 3 feet behind her daughter in a restaurant and not looked away first. The records took another day. They arrived the following evening, not a file this time, but his man standing in the doorway with an expression that had been carefully constructed to reveal nothing. Which meant that what he'd found had revealed something significant. He walked to the desk. Placed a single sheet of paper down. Stepped back. He read it. He read it again. The date at the top was 6 years old. An internal incident report, written in the clipped, careful language of people documenting something they wanted on record but did not want scrutinized. A patient brought in after a shooting. Severe. The attending physicians had assessed the situation. The severity of the injuries, the political complexity of the patient's identity, the risk calculation that certain people in certain hospitals sometimes made quietly and without announcement, and had made a determination. The determination was that the patient was unlikely to survive. That treatment, under the circumstances, was not the most practical application of the ward's limited resources. That the most efficient outcome was to make the patient comfortable and allow the night to proceed as it would. A patient brought in after a shooting. Severe. The attending physicians had assessed the situation, the severity of the injuries, the political complexity of the patient's identity, the risk calculation that certain people in certain hospitals sometimes made quietly and without announcement, and had made a determination. The determination was that the patient was unlikely to survive. That treatment, under the circumstances, was not the most practical application of the ward's limited and sensitive resources. That the most efficient outcome was to make the patient comfortable and allow the night to proceed as it would. There was a second notation beneath the official report. Handwritten. Added later by someone who felt it needed to be on record even if no one would ever act on it. Patient outcome reversed following intervention by night cleaning staff. Employee, C. Jackson. Refused to vacate the room when asked. Insisted physicians return and complete treatment. Remained present until attending doctor complied. Patient stabilized by 4 a.m. Hajun sat very still. He read the line again. Refused to vacate the room when asked. A woman who cleaned hospital floors for a living had stood in a private ward in the middle of the night and refused to move until the doctors came back. Had refused to let them walk away from someone they had already decided wasn't worth the trouble. Had stayed until they had no choice but to return and treat and save. Hajun knew the patient's name without needing to read it. He had been that patient. He remembered the night only in fragments, the shooting, the car, the pain that had a color too. It, deep and red and consuming. He remembered arriving somewhere. He remembered voices. He remembered a point where the voices had receded, and he had understood with the clarity that sometimes comes at the edge of things that nobody was coming back. And then someone had. He had never seen her face. He had been unconscious by the time she'd won the argument. He had woken at 4:15 in the morning to the sound of monitors and a doctor who wouldn't meet his eyes, and Shin sitting in the corner of the room with the exhausted relief of a man who had prepared himself for the worst and been denied it. Hajun had spent 6 years not knowing why he was alive. He knew now. He looked at the name on the paper. C. Jackson. He looked at the window. The city looked back. He thought about a woman in a navy uniform balancing 3 plates, apology already prepared. Moving at the speed of someone who had been carrying everything alone for a very long time. And had simply accepted that as the definition of her life. He thought about what it cost to stand in that room. What kind of person stands in that room? He pressed his fingers flat against the desk. Shin was still standing by the door, still maintaining his careful expression, still waiting. She doesn't know, Hajun said. It wasn't a question. No record of her ever being informed who the patient was, Shin confirmed. She was let go from St. Myra's the following week. No explanation given. They had fired her. After what she had done, in the middle of the night, alone, they had let her work her remaining shifts and then handed her a termination notice with no explanation and expected her to simply absorb it and leave. And she had. Because she was Chloe Jackson, and absorbing things without complaint and leaving without making it anyone else's problem was apparently something she had decided was just the shape of her life. Ha-jun stood up. He walked to the window. Stood there for a long time. He went back to the restaurant on the third day. Not with his men. Not with the cars arranged in their usual formation. He went alone, in the mid-morning quiet before the lunch rush arrived, when the street outside was still unhurried and the restaurant had the particular stillness of a place preparing itself for the day ahead. Chloe looked up when he walked in. Every muscle in her body went careful and controlled in the way of someone who has spent years learning to manage fear without showing it. She straightened. Kept her hands busy. Kept her face professional. He sat at the same table. She brought water without being asked. They existed in the same space and silence for a moment, the specific silence of two people who are both aware that something has shifted but have not yet determined how to address it or whether to address it at all. Then the kitchen door swung open and Amelia walked in. She was early, school had let out at noon today, a half-day, something Ha-jun could not possibly have known but somehow did not seem surprised by. She had her backpack on and her homework book already in her hand and her lensless glasses on, and she walked through the restaurant with the confident stride of someone who had decided long ago that all spaces were fundamentally hers until proven otherwise. She saw Ha-jun. She stopped. Looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. Then she walked directly to his table, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down without being invited. Ha-jun looked at her. She looked back. "You came back," she said. "I had some things to think about." Amelia considered this with great seriousness. "Good," she said. "Thinking is important. I think a lot. My teacher says I think too much, but I think she's wrong about that." A pause. "I knew you'd come back," she added. Ha-jun studied her. "Did you?" "Yes." She set her homework book on the table, straightened her glasses. "I knew from the first day." Something in his expression shifted. "The first day," he repeated carefully. "When you walked in." She said it simply, factually, the way she said things that were obvious to her and that she was mildly surprised needed explaining. "I recognized you." The restaurant was very quiet. Chloe had gone completely still behind the counter. Ha-jun looked at this child, 6 years old, beaded braids, lensless glasses, and felt the ground move slightly beneath the conversation, the way it moves when you realize something was built differently than you assumed. "You recognized me," he said slowly. "From where?" Amelia looked at him steadily. "I was 4, she said. "But I remember things. I remember most things, actually. My mummy says it's a gift. I think it's just paying attention." She paused. "We were at the hospital the night when I was with my mummy because she was working late and there was nobody to stay with me, so she brought me and I slept on the chair in the hallway." Ha-jun said nothing. "But I woke up." Amelia's voice was unhurried, matter of fact, just a child telling a story she had been carrying for 2 years and had simply been waiting for the right moment to set down. "I woke up because my mummy was talking loudly. She doesn't usually talk loudly. So I went to see." She looked at him over her glasses. "The door was open a little bit. I could see the room. I could see the doctors leaving. And I could See my mummy standing in the middle of the floor telling them to come back. She tilted her head. She used her serious voice. The one she uses when something really matters and she's not going to move until it's fixed. Ha-jun was very still. I saw you, Amelia said. On the bed. I didn't know who you were then. You were just the person my mummy was staying for. She paused. She stayed for a long time. Until they came back. I watched through the door. She reached into her homework book and took out something she'd been keeping between the pages. A small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with careful hands and placed it on the table between them. It was a drawing. Done in pencil, small and precise in the way that children who take things seriously draw, not careless, but considered. A room. A bed. A small figure standing in the center with her hands on her hips. Even in pencil, even drawn by a 4-year-old's memory preserved and rendered by a 6-year-old's hand, the figure was unmistakably Chloe. Ha-jun looked at the drawing for a long time. When you walked into our restaurant, Amelia said quietly, I recognized your face. From the room. From the door. She folded her hands on the table. I wanted to see how you behaved. Before I said anything. I wanted to see what kind of person you were when you thought nobody important was watching. She looked up at him directly. And then you shouted at my mummy. The words landed without accusation. Just truth. The plain, clean kind that 6-year-olds deliver. Without armor because they haven't yet learned that truth is something adults usually dress up before presenting it to people who might not want to receive it. Ha-jun looked at the drawing. He looked at Amelia. He looked across the restaurant at Chloe, who was standing at the counter with her hand pressed flat against the surface and her eyes very bright, listening to her daughter dismantle and rebuild the last 6 years in the span of 4 minutes. He thought about a woman who had stood in a hospital room in the middle of the night for a stranger she didn't know, whose name she would never be told, who belonged to a world that had never once done anything for her. Who had refused to move. Who had used her serious voice, the one she used when something really mattered and she wasn't going to move until it was fixed. He thought about being fired the following week. He thought about what it cost her. What it had cost her every day since, every early morning, every long shift, every meal. Balanced carefully, every careful calculation of what could be afforded and what couldn't, every night tucking in a little girl who drew families of 3 and wore glasses with no lenses because she said they helped her see how people really behaved. He stood up. He walked to the counter. Chloe looked at him. And for just a moment, just the smallest fraction of something crossed her face that wasn't professional and wasn't composed and wasn't the carefully maintained surface she showed the world. Something that was just her. Tired and strong and present, completely. You saved my life, Ha-jun said. Not loudly. Not with any particular ceremony. Just a man saying a true thing to the person it was owed to. Chloe blinked. 6 years ago. St. Myra's. Ward C. He held her gaze. You were the one who stayed. The color shifted in Chloe's face. Something moved through her, recognition, the particular kind that arrives not like a shock but like something slowly coming into focus, a shape you've been looking at sideways finally turning so you can see it completely. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I didn't know who you were, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. I just knew they were going to let you die. I know, Ha-jun said. I would have done it for anyone. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had walked into her restaurant 3 days ago and made the room go cold, whose name she'd heard in the way people said names they were afraid of, who had raised his voice at her over a mistake that wasn't hers and set Something in motion that had led, somehow, to this. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Ha-jun was quiet for a moment. "Because you deserve to know," he said simply. "And because I walked in here 3 days ago. And spoke to you in a way that was wrong. And a 6-year-old had to be the one to say so. Because every adult in that room, including me, had forgotten that some things are simply wrong regardless of who does them." He looked back at Amelia, who was sitting at the table watching them both with her hands folded and her lensless glasses straight and the expression of someone watching a very long equation finally, satisfyingly, balance. Something happened to Ha-jun's face then. Not the cold unreadability he wore like a second skin. Not the careful blankness of a man who had spent decades making sure nothing showed. Something underneath all of that, older, quieter, something that had been sitting beneath 20 years of careful construction waiting for a room small enough and honest enough for it to surface. He looked like a person. Just a person, standing in a small restaurant on an ordinary afternoon, holding the weight of something he hadn't known he'd been carrying. He picked up Amelia's drawing from the table where she'd left it. Carried it back to her. Set it down in front of her with both hands. "Keep this," he said. Amelia looked up at him. "You already knew," he said. "From the beginning. You already knew, and you still asked me to apologize." "Yes," Amelia said. "Why?" She considered this with the great seriousness she brought to questions that deserved it. "Because knowing who someone is doesn't change whether they behaved well," she said. "Those are 2 different things. My mummy taught me that." Ha-jun looked at this child. This small, enormous child who had walked into the space between him and the whole city's fear of him and simply refused to acknowledge that the distance existed. Who had watched through a hospital door at 4 years old and filed it away with the patience of someone who understood that some things take time to come around. Who had sat in a restaurant doing her homework and waited to see what kind of person he really was, and when he had answered that question badly, had climbed down from her stool and asked him to do better. He thought about every room he had ever walked into. The silence that preceded him. The adjustments people made. In posture, in expression, in the quality of their breathing, the moment he appeared. The particular performance of an entire world reshaping itself around his presence. And then he thought about Amelia. Who had looked at all of that and thought, interesting. But is he good? And had decided the answer was, not yet. But possibly. He straightened. Looked at Chloe one more time, she was watching him with fire still present behind the caution, careful and dignified and entirely herself. "Thank you," he said. "For the thing you did 6 years ago. And for every day after it that it cost you." Chloe held his gaze. She didn't say it was nothing. She didn't say don't mention it. She was Chloe Jackson, and she had spent enough years absorbing things that diminished her to know that what she had done in that room had not been nothing, and she was no longer in the business of pretending otherwise. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly. Ha-jun nodded once. He looked at Amelia. "Goodbye, Amelia." "Goodbye," Amelia said pleasantly. She tilted her head. "Your manners are better today. I noticed." The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Just once. But it was there. He walked out of the restaurant into the ordinary afternoon, no formation, no cars arranged at the curb, just a man stepping onto a street and pausing for a moment in the light. He had walked into that restaurant 3 days ago as the most feared man in the city. He walked out of it as something he hadn't been in a very long time. Someone who had been seen clearly, judged honestly, and found, not yet good enough, but possibly, with consistency, with effort, with the particular kind of attention that a 6-year-old in lensless glasses was apparently willing to provide, capable of becoming so Behind him, through the restaurant window, Amelia climbed back onto her stool, opened her homework book, and picked up her pencil. She did not watch him go. She already knew he'd be back. And that, right there, is where everything truly begins. If this story found its way into your chest today, if Amelia made you want to stand up straighter, if Chloe made you feel seen, if Hajun walking out of that restaurant changed made you believe that people can be reached by the right kind of honesty at the right kind of moment, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning. There are more stories here waiting for you. Stories with heart. Stories with courage. Stories that remind you that the most powerful person in any room is sometimes the smallest one, the one who looks at everything clearly and simply refuses to be afraid of what she sees. We will see you in the next one.